the tenant and the landlord have 180-degree opposite goals, right? Tenant wants to stay there as long as they can rent-free so that they can save money and move. And the landlord wants them out yesterday so they can get that unit cash flowing again. And that immediately becomes a fight once you have a tenant that understands that there's a lot of protections out there that they can utilize.
Hi, this is Chris German, and welcome back to the Apartment Dealer Show. Today, for you, in our lineup, is one of the most prominent eviction attorneys here locally in Southern California, and one of the most prominent real estate attorneys. We look to discuss what is challenging landlords today. What do landlords need to be aware of? And how do you empower yourself as a landlord, given multifamily ownership today has only increased in risk, has become more confusing, and there's more challenges. Mr. Mike Brennan and Steven Spierer are here with us, and they're here to inform you what you need to know when it comes to all the legalities of owning multifamily properties. So, gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Now, anticipation for our next live educational luncheon, I thought I'd bring you together, ask you some questions that are on the minds of the landlords and investors, some of the phone calls I've received of late. Since COVID, landlords overall, my opinion, have become, when dealing with tenants, a little gun shy, discouraged. They're on their heels, I think, when it comes to dealing with tenants and approaching tenants about specific things. They feel essentially like, well, the tenants are now in control. Many landlords feel that way, that COVID turned the tables, and now it's very difficult to deal with the tenants. And even if you end up in court, you have a losing proposition as a landlord. What would be your guys' take on that?
I see that as only half of what I'm seeing, Chris. That is true. There are people out there that are gun shy. I also see that many landlords have taken the other tack, and they have become more aggressive with the tenants and tolerating less, I'll call it, shenanigans from the tenants because of that. For those who are a little more concerned and they're taking a little bit more of a conservative approach, I think it's important to realize that it's not simply because of COVID. We still have a wave, I'll call it, of rent control and just cause that is evolving right now. As you know, we were just talking, Pasadena passed Measure H, which a very burdensome just cause eviction ordinance. Burbank is revamping there. And I think the dust, while COVID dust has settled more or less, this wave of just cause and rent control has not settled yet. And there's still a growing list of cities that are considering it. And when it gets to the courts, my staff and I talk about this frequently. A lot of pressure is gone from us now. We think things are starting to move a little easier. It's almost like we were pre-COVID, not quite there, but almost, with the exception of, like I said, we have to learn all these new laws for these various cities. And then, Chris, you and I were talking about this before we jumped on the camera. We're seeing a really large number of new tenants' rights firms coming online as a result of the, everybody's got a right to public counsel movement that's taking place. And that's kind of a mixed bag as well. A lot more tenants are filing jury demands. A lot more of them are coming in with attorneys right off the start. But at the same time, a lot of these new law firms are new to the game. They don't understand it all. And they're actually coming in and saying, okay, let's talk settlement right off the bat, instead of, just hitting us with discovery, pounding us. So it's kind of a mixed bag is the point I'm making. There is a lot to be concerned about as a landlord, but at the same time, a lot of things have smoothed out for us.
Now, would you say that, or what percentage would you say the cost of evictions have increased for landlords? Not because you've increased your fees, but in other words, because it's escalating, more than it would have previously.
Well, if you're talking LA, I would say high 90% of cases cost more than they used to. A lot of that is there's a sword and a shield component to that. The shield side is if we're getting hit with all these tenants' rights firms that know what they're doing, they're immediately demanding a jury trial and they're immediately hitting us with discovery. But one strategy that we've started employing recently that's actually working out is we're also using it as a sword, and we're hitting them with discovery to make them prove a lot of these affirmative defenses that they're raising, which is, I think, from what I can see, that's playing into why we're getting these attorneys to reach out to us to say, hey, what can we do settlement wise? So yeah, the costs have definitely gone up on probably 95% of evictions in LA County.
First of all, I agree with everything you just said, Mike, and of course, Mike's expertise is deep in evictions and unlawful detainers. I consider him to be one of the top people in his field. Because I'm a real estate attorney and a real estate investor, and our investment company has a little over 3,000 apartment units in 4 states, my perspective on this is both from the legal perspective and the practical perspective. And the advice I give to any landlord is the very first thing to do, no matter how the tenants are conducting themselves, no matter what the tenants' rights people are saying, no matter what the courts may or may not do, you have to be an excellent landlord. You have to make sure that repairs are done promptly and effectively. You have to make sure that you regard and treat the residents as your customers, because that's what they are. Where a landlord comes in with a high-handed or heavy-handed approach and says, look, this is my property and I'm the boss, that's not correct. These are your customers, and if they're treated properly, and if everything in their dwelling works and works properly, and things are maintained, and you take the trouble to plant flowers or put in new furniture at the swimming pool, or a new barbecue at the barbecue area, if you have one, this is critical. And what it does is it creates an entirely different environment for a landlord, so that an eviction, if it has to happen, it's much harder for these people to come back and legitimately say there's a habitability argument. Some will anyway. But then that's where Mike indicates that discovery will quickly poke holes in.
So let me stop you there for 1 second, Steve. So because I can hear the landlords in my head saying, "Look, I tried the nice guy thing, and what did I get in return? The state hit me. I kept my rents at a comfortable level, and the state hit me with rent control. I've tried to take care of the tenants, and now the courts, even if I'm in the right as a landlord and I've done nothing wrong, the courts have turned on me, where now I am the criminal here. So I have to be, even though I don't want to, I have to be heavy-handed. And as I'm bringing in new tenants, I do have to let them know, hey, I'm the boss and we don't play games here. And if that's what your plan to do is your plan is, then you need to keep moving on down the street. So what's your take on that?
2 things can be true at once. The first thing is that everything that landlord says, and I hear it every day, about having been a good person and now got slammed for it, got punished, nice guys finish last, sort of a feeling. It's been deeply unfair and continues to be deeply unfair. And if you do your job correctly, if you as a landlord do all the things that need to be done, that is important, and that's going to be fundamental to avoiding problems and minimizing problems once they happen. When you have a landlord who at the beginning sends the message that they're the boss, this is the wrong attitude, the wrong thing. It's only going to create problems later, because the tenant who wants to move in might quietly say, yes, boss, whatever you say, boss, and then they'll be angry by the time something else doesn't work. I think there are the speech to give to tenants at the beginning would be, I, as the landlord, have the responsibility of providing a proper space where everything works. I want to know right away if anything isn't working. You need to use these forms or this email system or whatever your system is for notifying me in writing, so I'll know, and then I'll respond quickly and effectively. That's my job as your landlord, is to fix things if they have broken and to not charge you for them if it's through no fault of your own, if it's through normal wear and tear, or as long as you aren't the one who broke it or ruined it or stuffed up the toilet. And your job as a resident is two things. You need to pay the rent in full, on time, every time, never a day late, never a dollar short. And two, you need to not damage the property. This is your home. This is my property, but it's your home. You need to not do that. If you do those two things, I won't ask you to do anything else. If more than that is communicated, if the landlord begins to explain, I want you to behave this way or not do that or not make noise or whatever it would be, you're setting up the resentments and the resistances that will later come back to bite you.
You shared that philosophy with me on this show years ago. And so as I'm renting my own units, that's somewhat of the speech I give. But I also add to that, Steve, you'll find here that everyone who lives here is a good neighbor. And that when it comes to the sheet, they're supposed to sign about like the behavior, not behavior, but I'm trying to think of what that sheet is. But basically,
house rules.
There you go. I basically tell them, look, we're going to go over these, but the summation of them is just be a good neighbor. And I think you'll find that everyone else will be a good neighbor.
Absolutely. That's aspirational. That's calling upon people to be good citizens. And I say the words good citizens. You want to call on people to be their best selves. You want to say we call on everyone to be their best self. And there's nothing wrong with aspirational. But in terms of tonality and phrasing, we have seen situations where tenants come back later and they're just livid over what they were told 6 months or 2 years ago about you need to make sure that you're not a bad person in this building. You can't. The simple rule is don't be an a-hole, and they say it that way or worse to a brand new resident who they're just getting to know. Mm. So it's a matter of tonality and delivery. I have no problem with aspirational suggestions to people. Most people like that. Most people are good people who want to be good people.
And so then let's assume that conversation takes place. Why do landlords still get sued? What have you found, Steve, at times? They still get sued. What are some of these common things that tenants are bringing claim on, or they're the biggest challenges for landlords? How do we not get sued?
It's hard for me to picture. It's hard for me to remember a situation where a landlord did these things correctly and then got sued. Now, it's not hard for me to imagine a tenant who does damage to the property or doesn't pay the rent. It's not hard for me to imagine something goes wrong anyway. But just spontaneously getting sued, slip, trips, and falls, okay, those are going to be insured. Somebody trips over a stair or whatever, falls off a balcony because the railing gave way. That's something different. But we don't see that many problems when the landlords are doing it correctly that are just lawsuits against landlords. But again, you have to habituate the resident to doing it correctly. So if the rent is due on the 1st, it's due on the 1st. And there should be a 3-day notice on the 2nd and a conversation. The first time it's not a 3-day notice. The first time it's, hey, it's the 2nd of the month. You haven't paid the rent. This can't stand. You have to pay the rent on time. It's one of your 2 obligations, and you remind them. And sometimes if you say to a resident, I want you, when you're moving in, I want you to know those 2 obligations, paying the rent on time every time in full. I really mean that. That doesn't mean paying on the 2nd. You're going to be out of town or unable to do it on the 1st. Do it on the 30th of the preceding month. Do it early, but you can't do it late. It's a matter of making those 2 simple rules and then enforcing them relentlessly.
And so then, Mike, from your side of the table, why, even if we have this great conversation, why do some landlords end up with non-paying tenants?
I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. Most of what Steven said, I agree with wholeheartedly. There's a couple of things that I have a different perspective on. I do see landlords get sued as a tool. For example, if you serve a 3-day notice and you're going to evict the people, and they know they have no affirmative defense, they'll go out and sue the landlord as leverage. I see tenants' rights firms use it as leverage. And I could give you story after story where we begged a tenants' rights firm, don't make us do this. We don't want to do this. And we've gone through with it because they wouldn't settle. And their reaction is to turn around and sue the landlord after we won a jury trial. And I'm not talking about one isolated situation. I'm talking about a strategy used by tenants' rights firm. So I do think landlords get sued a lot. As far as why tenants aren't paying rent, there's a lot of reasons for that. We've touched on this the last few luncheons we've had, Chris. There's a lot of dynamics going on in the worldwide economy in the United States and in California specifically. Those economic factors are creating housing shortages. They're making it hard for people to pay rent. Putting those bigger pictures aside, there's always a subset of tenants that are irresponsible, don't pay their rent, and it doesn't matter how much they're. Look, we have Section 8 tenants we evict, and their rent is less than $100 a month, and they don't pay their rent. So there's a lot of reasons people don't pay their rent. The biggest problem, and I'll touch on something you said, Chris. You said that the landlords are coming back saying, hey, it's not fair to me. The courts are taking the tenant's side. I do want to create a little bit of a caveat there. It's not so much the courts. I'll say that. The courts are applying the law in most cases. And if the landlords really, once they start that eviction, if they want to get aggressive and go through with all the steps that a regular lawsuit entails, most of the time those clients are going to win. But it is the government, the city of LA, the county of LA, all the 88 cities that are talking about rent control now, they're the ones who are turning their backs on the landlords. And they're the ones who are, by passing these, like Measure H, Pasadena's Measure H, if you read through that law is so onerous on landlords that it actually emboldens tenants to go out and play games and not pay their rent. So there's a lot of reasons tenants don't pay rent, and they run the gamut from I just couldn't afford it this month and I fell on some hard times to I got sick to I don't have to. What are you going to do? Evict me. So it's a very strange dynamic.
I would say also that a suggestion to a landlord is if the rent, you can say to someone if they are having trouble paying rent, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
You're out, tell me what your problem is. And you'll hear a story about whatever their problem is, why they don't have the money. And then you can make accommodations and arrangements, but you have to have a dialogue, and you want to have that dialogue. The goal that Mike and I both have is to not have you have to go to Mike. That's right. The whole idea. If you can solve this problem with your resident on an amicable human basis that still works as a practical business matter, then that is what you have to do.
That's absolutely right. I've told you guys this story many times. I counsel my clients when a tenant falls behind in rent, go see if you can work out a deal where if you have to pay them some money. I don't like the concept, but if you have to pay them a small amount of money and get them to sign an agreement that says I'm leaving to avoid calling me, do it. But as the tide turns, that's becoming less and less of a reality because again, the internet's there, the tenants know they're protected. They know that they can make it very difficult for a landlord, very costly. So they do. When they don't, look, the best way to look at it is this way. Once the tenant falls behind, you guys, the tenant and the landlord have 180-degree opposite goals, right? Tenant wants to stay there as long as they can rent-free so that they can save money and move. And the landlord wants them out yesterday so they can get that unit cash flowing again. And that immediately becomes a fight once you have a tenant that understands that there's a lot of protections out there that they can utilize.
I remember going back several years at our events where the toughest question was, hey, well, now there's this emotional support animal thing. What do we do about that? And that literally was like the toughest question of a year. But things have definitely changed. So because the two of you have been at this a long time, longer than I, how would you say being a landlord, either strategically, logistically, what has changed most about being a landlord over the last decade?
I think what you said, Mike, it's the political atmosphere. It's the idea that people and the internet and the uprise of lawyers who make their living by just keeping undeserving tenants in possession. And when I say undeserving, they don't deserve to live there if they don't pay the rent, provided the landlord is doing what they're supposed to do, to keep them in there as long as possible. That's probably the biggest thing. Eviction is downstream from culture, and culture has made it more less of a stigma for a tenant to fail to pay their rent and to fail to do a lot of things in society. And so the fact that all of these problems exist, these are all downstream from culture. And the culture is who's responsible, which is why in an initial interview with a tenant who's made a rental application, you want to listen to them and ask them, how seriously do you take your responsibility to maintain this property? How seriously do you take your responsibility to pay your rent? How seriously do you take your responsibility to tell me right away if my building isn't up to snuff so I can fix it quickly and effectively? And you get them to tell you those things. And those are relatively safe questions if they're asked and phrased the same way every single time. You have to be very careful not to ask illegal questions, but those are good questions to ask.
I want to add on that because I agree with that. And that's a subtlety I didn't address. But Steven, you just said something really important. The culture is huge in this. There is no stigma with an eviction anymore because the statutes now seal the records until a judgment is entered. And in most cases, any attorney will tell you this, most of the time it never goes to a judgment because you're either settling or, one reason or another, it's not going to go to a settle. I mean, it's not going to go to the trial and get that judgment. And it used to be about a 50-50 ratio where 50% of people would just go by default and not file an answer. And so the landlord would get their property back. And then 50% of the people would file an answer and you negotiate some sort of a settlement. Now the tides have turned. I would say it's closer to, in LA County, it's closer to 85 to 90% of the tenants file an answer. And it's this long drawn out battle now. But in the end, what every tenants' rights attorney will insist on is that the record remain sealed. So as Steven said, culturally, there's no stigma, there's no shame to having behaved and become an undesirable tenant, right? There is none. There's no consequences to it anymore. And so to answer Chris's question, what has changed? The political environment has certainly changed, like Steven pointed out. Absolutely. The level of knowledge that landlords need to have now has increased, I'd say, at least fourfold. The sophistication landlords have to know that now is tremendous compared to what it was just a decade ago. And Steven also mentioned something that I think is key. Your greatest tool is right at the beginning of the relationship, and that's the tenant screening process. That's the application process. That is your greatest tool at avoiding all of these problems that we're talking about right now. And I don't think many landlords I think they're starting to understand that, but I don't think as many landlords as I would like understand that screening process, that's the key to everything. The more time you spend there and the more diligence you put there and the more time you take to artfully craft some questions like Steven's done, the less problems you're going to have. If you take that screening process as, a half-hearted, then you're going to run into a lot of problems.
Well, it's interesting, when it comes to the tenant screening process. So when we're in the process of helping a client sell a building or help an investor purchase a building, of course, we go through the due diligence and we look at the rental agreements, tenant applications. And sometimes, being a landlord myself as well, sometimes I'm looking at it going, how in the world did they ever rent to this person? As I look at the app and the work history, little to none, and the wages. And I don't know, still, for many landlords, they have this thought that, number one, they can't get as high of rents as they can if they would turn over a unit and remodel it to today's amenities, and there's a different tenant base out there. And two, that they can't be very selective in terms of who they're renting to, so they're literally putting just anybody in there. And I was hoping earlier when I asked my earlier question, I didn't want to guide you too much, but this is what I thought you would end up is. It really starts at the tenant screening. So many problems can be avoided at the tenant screening table. Steve, I know you wanted to say something.
100%. At this point, I'm sure there are some landlords watching this who are thinking, oh, you know what? I'd better get out of the landlord business, or I better get out of California. The wrong answer. The vast majority of landlords and tenants get along well, rent gets paid, the buildings are properly maintained, and things go well. And because of what we do for a living, we're like a doctor who goes to the hospital and comes away thinking, wow, everybody in there is sick. Yes, that's why they're in the hospital. And the people who are talking to lawyers about their residents, that's a problem, and that's a problem they're having. But this is so much a business proposition. And the screening idea is critically important. You can't ask illegal questions. You can't ask personal questions, but you don't need to. You can ask the questions that I suggested, and there are a bunch of other questions you can ask that make perfect sense.
Now, there's a new rent control bill that's going to be voted on in 2024. Just 2-3 weeks ago, it got enough signatures that it's going to be on the ballot for 2024. From what I've reviewed, and maybe Mike, you can chime in if there's something I'm missing, but in my review, the three biggest changes would be this. Number one, it would bring rent control to single family homes, where single family homes are not under rent control now. Number two, regardless of the construction date of a property, it would be under rent control versus the way the law is now. Right now, if a property is built within the last 15 years, it doesn't fall under rent control. Here, everything is fair game for rent control. And then most problematic in my opinion is the vacancy control, where literally now, I don't know which entity it would be, if it's city, county, or whom, but they would be able to regulate the asking rent for vacant units. What do you see as most worrisome about this new proposed bill, and do you think it'll pass?
Like try to pick between having a stroke or a heart attack. To pick between those three, those are all bad policies for tenants as well as landlords.
Well, I could sum it up in 2 words, one phrase. Chris, what you're describing is a law that's on the books currently called Costa-Hawkins. And Costa-Hawkins is a law that came out that protected landlords from overreaching rent control and eviction control. And it touched on all 3 of those: what year, single family homes, and vacancy decontrol. What I will say about this new proposed law is it's Mr. Weinstein bringing it, same gentleman who brought a statewide rent control multiple times in the past. He's got a dubious reputation in the industry. He's lost every time he's brought this to the statewide voters, which is what we're going to see this on the statewide ballot again. And so I think there are certain organizations, for example, the Business Roundtable, when in 2019, when last time they brought this to the state, the voters, the Business Roundtable did a fantastic job at defeating it. And I would say I'm fairly confident that these same organizations that were able to defeat it in 2019 will come back and they will mount a really good fight against it again. And I'm hopeful. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to pass. Let me say it that way. I think we can beat it. We've done it multiple times in the past. And I think that it will take time and money. I think it's critical. Probably the most important thing you said out of all of that, Chris, was the vacancy decontrol. And just to explain that to your viewers, what that currently under every rent control scheme out there, when a unit goes vacant, the landlord can set the rent at whatever the market rent is at that time. Previously, the city of Santa Monica had vacancy control, which said, even if your unit goes vacant, your rent for your new tenant is the same rent you were charging your old tenant. So that's when your unit becomes vacant, it's still controlled. That is probably the most worrisome aspect of this new proposed law. But again, I think it can be defeated if everybody rallies around. Here's my bigger concern, Chris. Much like we defeated it in 2019.
Yep.
What happened immediately after we defeated it on the statewide ballot? Well, the state legislators turned around and implemented statewide rent control anyway on a different level. So if we are able to defeat this, then what's to stop the statewide legislators from doing the exact same thing and saying, doggone it, we didn't get the voters to vote for it again. Let's turn around and pass some new law to get rid of Costa-Hawkins, which they've been trying to do for, ever since its inception in the 90s. So do I think we can beat it? Yeah. Do I think the fight's over? Absolutely not.
If it passes, if something like that passes, there will be a dead stop to development of new units, and it will have an immediate effect on all real estate development in the state, which will then make the housing problem worse. And the political leadership of the state actually understands that at some level. And so it's a question of getting a unified, because there is in California a supermajority of Democrats in the state legislature, to get them with a unified voice to say that, well, this is too far. You can't go that far because it's going to hurt. First and foremost, it's going to hurt the tenants and the people who are trying to be first-time home buyers. It's going to hurt all the people that you don't want to hurt. That message will be part of that political campaign, and it always is.
I do agree with you, Steven, that they do know the fallout that will occur. The only difference of opinion I have is knowing who some of these are. It's important to understand they are radicals in Sacramento. They don't seem to function with a rational mind when it comes to looking down the road and saying, hey, what's the natural outcome of our actions? Well, it's going to create greater housing problems. I almost think, and I know this is a very cynical view, but it is what it is. I almost think that they look at that and say, okay, we're okay with that. We're okay with that'll give us, if we have a bigger housing problem, it'll just mean that we'll get in there and we'll legislate it into perfection at some point. The legislators always seem to think that no matter what the fallout is, they can fix it. And it doesn't work that way.
The fundamental difference in their view of how these things work is that they do not believe that there should be private ownership.
That is absolutely right.
They believe that we should all share, and that there's
absolutely
rather than people voting with their dollars to live closer to the ocean or to have a better view or to have a bigger house, that instead housing should be passed out on some other basis, that they would decide who gets to live in what kind of house rather than have it go to the highest bidder. They think that going to the highest bidder favors people with more money over people with less money. And of course it does, but they have to, I would hope they could express the way they would distribute possession rights to real estate if they've got a better idea than that.
It's interesting you would use that phrase, possession rights, because what Chris hasn't brought up yet, I'm assuming that he was going to, and maybe I'm beating him to the punch, is there is also a measure that will very likely be voted on. I think it may have the signatures already, don't quote me on that, but it is the concept that housing is a fundamental right. And so that has also been put out there. And let me tell you guys something, if that were to pass, the implications throughout the real estate industry in California are impossible to state with any sort of accuracy right now. It would blow you away what the fallout of housing becoming a fundamental right will be. That is the equivalent of saying food is a fundamental right, so we should distribute food to everybody. Okay, it doesn't.
Yeah, you can worry about the homeless, but then what about the people who can't afford cell phones? I guess they could be called the phoneless, and maybe that's a fundamental right as well.
Exactly, but it's like I said, it's an interesting group of radical legislators up in Sacramento that are intentionally pushing the boundaries on private property rights with the intent of creating new law.
All of this politics is downstream from culture.
That is right.
There's a flow, and it's all downstream from culture. It's what the people who believe that there should be private property ownership and that people who can pay more for a steak than for a hamburger might be able to get a steak, and not everybody's going to be able to buy a steak every day. If those people remain silent and inactive, then the others will carry the day. I mean, there are many who don't know what apathy is, and they don't care.
That's funny.
So, much of our audience that attends these educational luncheons, I'd say little over half the room, they own one, maybe two multifamily properties here locally. So let's say for many of them, let's say their portfolio is 20 units or less. I'd say that's about half of the room. And I would even say that our viewership is a lot of those individuals that they're trying to ratchet their way up, own, 3,000 units like Mr. Spierer here. And so for these, what typically are called mom and pop investors, it's not a derogatory term, but those individuals that essentially picked themselves up by their bootstraps, saved their hard-earned money, got into the real estate game. Real estate in California has been good to them, and they've become self-made millionaires accidentally, if you will, right? They just knew real estate was a good investment, but they've become self-made millionaires over time. The question now is, are they being forced out, pushed out, given that they're vilified for simply being a landlord, that the culture has swung the way it has, that the politicians are gunning for them every day, planning and scheming on ways of how to make a landlord's life that much tougher, and with new proposed rent control bills and other laws that are being proposed, is it all under the guise of pushing mom and pops out of the industry here locally? What do you guys think?
What do you think, Steven?
I don't see it as an organized approach that way. I think that the organized approach is on behalf of the people who don't want private property ownership and who believe that the government can do a better job of bureaucratically distributing benefits to people than the free market system. I think it's more generalized than that. I don't think it's any particular group that's trying to get a particular group out. I think it doesn't look that way to me, Mike.
Well, not maybe I pose that question, not like organized crime, if you will, but isn't, even if not intentionally, isn't it a byproduct?
It shouldn't be. Every landlord who owns 1 unit or 5 units or 20 units or 100 units, any whatever you have, if you run it right, it's a profit-making business. It's a good business to be in. It's a solid business, and you can be proud of it. And if you do it correctly, the residents will almost always be appreciative. And when I say correctly, I mean in every aspect we've been discussing this hour, in terms of screening, in terms of maintaining the property and being responsive and courteous and deferential to your residents and treating them as your customers, the vast majority of the time you're going to be successful. It is, and you have to be very disciplined about, if the rent's in on the 2nd, it's late, we're going to have a conversation about it.
I would agree with Steven that it is not so much trying to push mom and pops out, or any segment in general. It really is based on the concept of private property ownership, which is buttressed by the fact that they now have a proposed law that says housing is a human right. In my opinion, I believe that the legislators in Sacramento really have a desire for the government to own and run the housing. And I've got plenty of reasons I could point to say, look, this is evidence of that opinion. But I think, and it's very funny because it's always, every law they want to pass is always put forward saying, hey, look, these corporate owners are doing X, Y, Z. And so it sounds like they're not attacking the mom and pops. But I think Chris is absolutely right. The byproduct is to attack mom and pops. Whether it's intentional or not is irrelevant. That is the outcome. And I think the end game here, at least in the short term, and by short term, what I mean is the next 20 years, I think the end game here, you will end up, or these laws will end up pushing the properties to the very people that the legislators complain about, which is the larger operators, because they have economies of scale. They can afford all these extra administrative steps that have to be taken because they're just going to hire somebody else in their office to go downtown, meet with the housing department, figure out all the regulations. Whereas a mom and pop, that's much more difficult for them to navigate that. And God forbid they have properties in 2 different jurisdictions or 3 different jurisdictions where they're trying to understand, my gosh, LA's got this, but Pasadena's got this, and Burbank's now got, that's a nightmare for a mom and pop. And so, again, like I said, in the long run, I think Chris is right. The byproduct of the whole situation is to push these mom and pops out. I think Steven's right. It's an attack on private property rights. And in the long run, I think it's pushing all these properties into the hands of the corporate owners who the legislators say they don't want controlling the housing market.
Right. I'm trying to play bad cop here in the sense of, I don't think it's like, one organized effort, but I want landlords to be aware, and why I invited you 2 gentlemen here today, them to be aware of these are not the days of old. It has definitely gotten there's more risk involved today. There's more obstacles and challenges. And so one thing you can do to empower yourself is to be informed. And that, this event that all of us partake in, I just don't know anything like it, where over the course of a few hours, you can be brought up to speed in all these various facets of owning multifamily property so that you are more equipped should, a new rent control law be passed, or should, these other things are dreaming up be passed. And so to that point, I know the 2 of you, you guys speak at the various trade associations. You're invited to be involved in many speaking engagements. Why? And then Steve, you've been a part of this event since the very beginning. Why do you choose to continue to come back year after year? What is it that the landlords need to know about this event if they're contemplating, attending, not attending?
If you're going to do something, you have to do it correctly. And it really doesn't matter whether you're making a sandwich or launching a rocket to the moon. If you have better information and are in a better position to do it correctly, it's easier. It's easier than if you wait until everything has fallen apart and you're floating face down in the water and then figure out, okay, what were the rules I should have been following? What were the best practices? What are the things I could have done to avoid this problem? So what I believe, and I know Mike Brennan believes this very same thing, and Chris German, I know you believe this very same thing, is that the best care is early care. If you understand well what the issues are and what you ought to be doing, what you should be doing to protect your investments, to maximize their profitability, to have low conflict, to have no need to speak with lawyers, then what we do at these seminars is very worthwhile. And preventing problems, it's like when a dentist teaches you to brush and floss your teeth. It helps it so you don't have to have your teeth drilled quite as often.
Chris, everybody's got an option, right? Anybody who owns rental property gets up every single day and they have an option. I can stay in the rental property business. I could sell. I could, give it to a trust. But if somebody is choosing to remain in the rental property business, what I would say is, and you asked the question earlier, what's changed in the last decade? I think in overview, and I agree with everything Steven just said, but I think in overview of what has changed is there was a time where my dad, that was not what he did for a living. He owned a couple smaller properties, and to be clear, he wasn't my biological dad. He was a surrogate dad of mine, and I learned a lot of this from him. And he did his own evictions. He wrote his own leases. He ran the properties. And like everything else in the world over the last decade, specialization has reared its head. And things have become so complicated on every single facet of property ownership, or especially residential property ownership in California now, that unless you are at a size where this is all you do is run these properties and you're deeply invested and you know what's going on all the time, the huge benefit to coming to your seminar, Chris, is that specialization. You have people up there. All I do is landlord tenant work. I don't do what Steven does, even though I think people would try to put me under that umbrella. Oh, it's real estate law. No, it's not. What Steven and I do are 2 completely different things. And they're very nuanced and they are specialties. The other people you have on the board, what they do has become very nuanced, and they are specialties. And the whole point of it is no person, or the very rare individual, I should say, has chosen their path to put themselves in the position to know all of this stuff, to run it effectively, run it efficiently, and make the most out of that asset. Everybody needs a team, no matter what they do. We've reached a point of specialization where it's just impossible to know all of this stuff. And so the benefit of coming to the seminars, whether you come once a year or twice a year, it doesn't matter, is staying informed. If you're going to choose to own property, you need to stay informed. You need a team of people that you can pick their brains and say, okay, I learned a little bit about landlord-tenant law today. I learned a little bit about how to structure the entities. I learned a little bit about what's going on in the lending industry today, which has changed radically just in the past year, right? So that's the benefit, is you have a whole group of people that in a relatively short amount of time are condensing a tremendous number of areas of knowledge into a lunch where you can walk away going, okay, I have a better idea of where I stand and whether I want to get up every day and remain a residential landlord in California.
Well, Mike, Steve, thank you for taking some time with us today to inform the owners. As always, we look forward to having you at our event, and we'll see the two of you soon.
Looking forward to it.
Appreciate it.
So there's only a few days left to register for our apartment owners educational luncheon, and there's literally only a few seats left. I hope by now we've shared with you some of the half of the speakers that are going to be on our panel. There's 9 of us that'll be at the event. At this point, why wouldn't you attend? In one short afternoon, you're going to be brought up to speed in all the various facets, the facets that matter when it comes to being a landlord. What is it that you need to know to carry you forth the next 12 months? Again, owning multifamily properties is not going to become easier. Things are not going to go back to the way they were. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. And so as we have year over year at these educational events, we bring the investors up to speed, landlords like you. What's the challenge of the day? And here's how you pivot to take lemons and make lemonade, if you will, and how to continue to profit and thrive. And I always say this, not just survive. It's not just about, okay, how do I survive this thing? No. There is still strategies, tactics you can utilize to truly, truly thrive. That's what this event is all about. There's no sales pitch whatsoever. We don't have any educational materials to sell you at the back of the room. We're peddling. Literally, it's all education for about the course of 3 hours, rapid fire, one speaker after another. We serve lunch, but we don't stop for lunch because there's too much material to cover. And you get the opportunity to rub shoulders with other investors who own probably maybe in the same neighborhood as you, or at least in a neighboring city, because the invites go out to only a certain geographical area of landlords. And the speakers themselves make themselves available when they're off stage. If you want to pull them aside and you have a question, particular to your situation, they make themselves available. It's just very user-friendly, if you will. So again, we encourage you, click the button below, get some more information in terms of register. There's even if you've never attended and you're curious to know more what the event's about, more of who's involved and so forth, there's a video that you can watch there that shows some highlights of our previous luncheon. That'll give you more of a flavor of what's it about. And I promise you, come once, you're definitely going to want to come in the future. So we look forward to seeing you again. The event is Thursday, September 14th. Register now. The seats are nearly gone. And this is Chris German from the Apartment Dealer wishing you positive cash flow, tenants who behave, and much protection from Uncle Sam. Till next time.